So sometimes there's nothing more terrifying than the thought of remaking a supposed genre classic. But Alexandre has something far more frightening in store for you, as Forever Horror Month begins with his remake of The Hills Have Eyes. The Carter family, led by Big Bob and wife Ethel, take a long road trip through the desert to San Diego. But when they stop for gas, the attendant Jeb gets an edge of suspicion that they may have stumbled upon a bag of incriminating items left by unseen accomplices. Thus, he directs them to a supposed shortcut down a dirt road, which he knows will lead them only to danger. When their tires are blown out and their car is wrecked, Big Bob and son-in-law Doug Bukowski try to find help, hiding out in opposite directions. Doug encounters a dead end with craters filled with derelict vehicles, with no answers as to why. Meanwhile, Big Bob discovers grisly remains and disturbing newspaper clippings about miners who wouldn't abandon their lands despite the nuclear testing being done in the area decades ago. Finding Jeb severely distraught, Bob finds himself stalked in the darkness and later is set ablaze by a pack of cannibalistic mutants who begin to ravage his family, laying waste to them and taking Doug and Lynn's baby girl into the depths of the desert hills. Now the few who survive must grapple with their grief and brutally fight to preserve what they have left, to not fall victim to these horrific abominations. To release into cinemas on March 10th, 2006, French filmmaker Alexandre presented his vision of The Hills Have Eyes, and with his friend and collaborator Gregory Levasseur having grown up and bonded so much over Wes Craven's original, and after Aja hit it very big with his film Hot Tension, they definitely jumped at the chance when Wes Craven approached them to update and revise his classic film and bring in their own sensibilities, their own mentalities, a new generation of filmmaking styles to his original film. They absolutely fantastically hit it big with a $69.6 million box office take of a mere $15 million budget. And released by Fox Searchlight Pictures, this absolutely was a film that just hit things right on the nail of what people were kind of looking for in the horror genre at this particular time, because you already had stuff like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, which was financially successful. You had James Wan's Saw and everything, all these much more brutal type of horror films coming out, and getting this thing in there, just hitting it off on a very solid type of note, and just introducing more of Aja's sort of mentalities to the screen and everything, a much more larger platform with a lot more resources to pull on. It was definitely a film that just nailed it so well, despite a lot of mixed reviews going on at the time, with a lot of people kind of focusing much more on the violence and not kind of looking at the craft of what Aja was putting into the film. But regardless, I think a lot of horror fans really strongly responded to this film. And despite producer Wes Craven hoping they could end up shooting this thing in the exact same place they did the original 30 years prior, ended up being condominiums being built in the area, made it very much unviable to do that. And despite looking at other locations like South Africa and Mexico and a few other places, Aja and Levasseur were so very much intent on shooting this in Morocco, where they also shot Hot Tension. So after a little work around with fears about maybe terrorist activity in the area, they ended up having a complete winner of a location here, despite the blistering heat of like 120 degrees Fahrenheit just bearing down on the entire production. They got such a great location with the landscapes you see throughout the entire film, create a character and personality for this absolutely barren desert isolated area that just goes on forever and ever. Just like the cinematography from Maxim Alexandre is absolutely phenomenal in the film, just how he captures the images of these craggy hills and all this type of landscape that's just out there for endless miles and everything. is something that's absolutely invaluable to the quality of the film in general, that it has to have that type of character out there to sell the danger, sell, again, the isolation, all these different feelings that the film is eliciting from the audience, and having all this sort of maze of sorts throughout this entire cavernous area, whatnot. Just like, it creates a certain vibe, a certain atmosphere, a certain just danger in the air of the entire thing. It creates that raw landscape that you actually positively need to convey to the audience, and just have that kind of soak into the fiber of the entire film. And I really like how Aja approaches the storytelling elements of the film, because get the cold open with sort of the horror, sort of terror stuff just jumping in into the audience right there at the beginning of the film. But then everything kind of has a gradual build. You get introduced to the characters and their dynamics and the various conflicts within the family and everything. You got the son-in-law and the father, whatnot, have this sort of tension between them and all these different things. It's a really nice type of thing that, even if it's very sort of atypical type of stuff or whatnot with a family dynamic, it makes them very realistic and relatable characters to see things that are very much real world type of stuff, how everyone interacts and all these different little arguments they have. It creates very believable, dimensional type of characters you can connect with and have things develop and flesh out as the film goes along. You see development of characters throughout the entire course of the film. And I like how just there is that slow build up. There's not a rush to get to the blood curdling type of terror or whatnot. You're going to develop the characters, ease the audience in to get connected to people, have certain relationships build up, and have a certain connection that you have real characters here in a realistic setting, and have these things sort of befall them as things go much more down the deeper end of things. And having a really solid cast of the whole thing is such a great type of thing, because I'm going to start with Ted Levine, because he's absolutely a fantastic actor. People know him from Silence of the Lambs. He was in Michael Mann's Heat. He's a very accomplished actor, wide ranges type of stuff, and this is like perfect casting. He has so much, oozes the whole thing of retired ex-cop, family man, very conservative type of values, a guy who's like, believes more in his gun than his wife's prayers, and various type of things. Like, he's so absolutely dead on perfect for this role that no one could embody it just as authentically as he does here, because he's got all the perfect qualities, blue-collar type of guy, with his family, that he kind of has that authoritative feeling with everyone involved here, and again, has a conflict with the son-in-law, but he's still got that strength, that sort of personality, that character grit to him that just feels so much like a retired cop. It just has that feeling overall, and just like every step of the way throughout the entire film that he works with, it's just absolutely fantastically realistic and genuine type of stuff. And Tom Barrow here is Jeb, this sort of gas station attendant who's this sort of accomplice under duress with the mutants in the hills and everything. He's fantastic in this whole thing, just having this very colorful type of character that has a certain twitchy, conflicted type of quality with him. There's remorse, but there's also intent with things. Kind of, he perceives situations erroneously early on in the film, so he sends the family down the dirt path towards their doom and everything. So it's like, it's a wonderfully interesting character he portrays, with a lot of just physicality and just a lot of depth and nuance in the emotions that he shows in all that, like I said, with the conflicts and all these different things he's got going on. Just a few scenes tells a lot with his character and his component in the entire plot of the film, and his background with these entire mutants. It's just like, everything is written so well for him, and just brings so much to the table to really create a very memorable character as well. And you got Dan Byrd here as the sort of young Bobby in this whole thing. You got Big Bob, who's Ted Levine, and then you got the younger kid in the family, whatnot. Him and Emilie de Ravin just have very good qualities throughout the entire course of this film. First, very distinct characters that have certain conflicts and tensions throughout the entire family and stuff like that. They're not very much pleased to be here on this long road trip and everything, but they have great things going on as things just go right down the deep end of everything. They just have these great moments where they're showing off just the terror, the fear, but also the deep grief after their family members get slain in all these different brutal type of ways. Just like, they have these great moments that show a lot of fantastic acting and building upon themselves, and just nail at every beat that they have to play in this whole thing. It really holds very strongly, and Kathleen, Quinlan, Vinessa Shaw, so many of the people in this film with his family create so many great, strong qualities, just very naturalistic emotions that they go through, that the entire course is type of stuff. It's all very well executed and just like so well played. But you got Stanford here, who maybe people probably know from the second and third X-Men films as Pyro. Seems very much unrecognizable in this film as Doug Bukowski, and he goes through the biggest arc in this whole thing. He ends up being pretty much like the main character of this film, where pretty much Aja wanted to go for very much of a Dustin Hoffman Straw Dogs type of feel for him, and that's very much evident with how they sort of designed the look of the character with the glasses, the beard, all this type of stuff, and just have this sort of more kind of like tech geeky type of character who's on the outs with the family and everything. This guy's very much early on in the film like has an aversion to the guns and violence and stuff like that. He's much more of a civilized individual with a very much passive aggressive sensibility and everything. But as the film goes along, you have this character who faces these traumatic, terrible type of situations, these things that you just can't possibly just cope with in a heartbeat. This character goes through so much terrible type of shit, seeing the woman he loves just get absolutely brutally taken out, and all these different things just like completely just bombard this guy, just going through and dealing with these horrifically deformed mutants and these people who just absolutely brutally just want to just tear them apart. He becomes a completely different style of character as he gets pushed beyond his limits to do things just to survive and retrieve his young kid. All these types of things just push this character towards a completely different level and everything, and Stanford just embodies every single quality magnificently through the start to the very finish of this film. Every quality he plays, from the very relatable type of character at the beginning of the film, because he's just very much an everyman type of guy, and is going through and just dealing with all this shit, just dealing with all this horrific type of stuff he has to deal with, fending for his life and everything, just having to be as brutal as the people that are coming down upon him. It's a very fascinating sort of arc he goes through, and just like, again, he sells the whole thing, absolutely genuinely getting just into the depths of the gore and the terror and all this type of stuff brutally, and just like fighting for his life every step of the way. He puts on a fantastic performance here. I think he just nailed every quality beautifully and just absolutely intensely as well. And extending beyond that into the mutants of the film, that they didn't just go ahead and just cast regular stuntmen and whatnot to be put on with prosthetics and everything. A lot of these guys, they wanted to get actual really solid character actors into these roles so they could perform through the makeup, have a lot of character to them. And they got some really good ones like Robert Joy, Billy Drago, Desmond Askew, and a fantastic stuntman with Michael Bailey Smith, who ended up being Super Freddy in Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. It got a fantastic team of guys to portray all these people, and even makeup effects master Greg Nicotero ended up donning a full prosthetic for this whole thing to be one of those mutants who gets beat to shit and everything. So you had a lot of guys just putting a lot of just absolute effort into the performances of these mutants to just give so much distinct character, so much ravenous quality, and just like different aspects of that. Alexandre Aja and Gregory Levasseur worked so much with K&B effects on this film to design these different types of things, to research how radiation would affect the human body and create different abnormalities and stuff like that to create very distinct type of mutants for this film. It worked out so very well because, again, Greg Nicotero, Howard Berger, all these guys, just absolute, just the top level type of guys, as I've said in so many reviews before, but can never overstate their quality of artistry and just attention to detail. They absolutely fantastically were the right guys to pull onto this film, create these ghastly looking creatures, these ghastly looking cannibalistic mutants and everything, and even wearing digital and practical effects. In a lot of cases, this stuff is absolutely seamless in the film. I think only the part where they have Big Bob, Ted Levine, kind of burning alive on the tree and everything really kind of shows a little bit of its digital edge to everything, but most of the effects where they're blending stuff together or removing wires or stuff like that, or just creating all these different effects that kind of marry both versions together, it's absolutely fantastically well done, and you don't even tell that they've done any of this with CGI blood or the different things going on where they just had to augment the practical effects They just nailed it so very well with so much what they had, even extending landscapes to create all the different craters or the far-off town that was made for these testing experiments and everything. All these things created a very solid, impressive package on the effects level of this movie. And again, you've got Maxim Alexandre's fantastic cinematography in this whole film, just charging right in this thing with so much of the intensity, like I said, with a lot of great camera movement that gives it so much of an urgency, so much of momentum, and all these different sequences just give it that just like everything's kind of raw and just kind of unfolding in such an intense focus and everything just on the edge of your seat type of stuff with the cinematography. And that so much benefits the taut suspense this film delves you into with the terror it has to offer here, because there's so many really great sequences here. I love the sequence where Ted Levine finally gets back to the gas station at night, and it's such a great sequence that uses, first off, just a great effect there where Jeb blows his own fucking head off. But then you have such a great use of the sound design, having the voices come off in the distance. You just have these wide shots of Ted Levine, their Big Bob, shooting out with the gun and everything into the darkness. It's just like, it's such a well-crafted scene that every shot, every piece of audio design there works to just wrap the tension up much more tightly. And when he gets in the car and he sees Billy Drago's character in the back and everything, just like, it just uses and shows what it needs to such great effect. It's a wonderful tight sequence there, and just so much what they do overall with the nighttime sequences, but even when they're in daylight and you have just the veracity of the whole film just charging down upon you, all this stuff just hits off so strongly. But the film has some shocking moments of violence in this whole thing that been about 5 years or so, maybe a little bit longer since I last saw the film, and some of the stuff was still just really just nailing me very adversely. And I mean, this is a film that does not hold anything back. This is a film that goes straight for the unsettling, disturbing type of violent acts. It's not for the light of heart, not for the squeamish, not for someone who's just a casual observer of horror films. This is made for a very hardcore, straight-up horror audience, and they just nail it so very well because I'm unsettled watching this stuff. It's very effective. It does what it needs to, very strongly, very much so raw for what they're doing here, putting characters in just absolute dire peril, and doesn't pull any punches when things come down to motivations of these mutants doing what they're going to do. People get off, people get hit up in gory, just terrible fashions, and you're going to feel it because they build up very strong characters. They build up relationships and characters that you can sympathize with, empathize with, and feel when they die. You feel the loss these other characters have. It just hits it off very, very well. That's a sign of a good horror film. You build up characters you can care about and go on the journey with them. When things go very, very badly for them, you feel it, and it aids towards the horror of the film. That's what a lot of other horror films tend not to get so much. They don't tend to delve into making good characters sometimes, and when the horror comes, it's not effective because you don't care about what happens to the characters. Aja and everyone else in this whole thing nailed that so well, casting it well, writing a nice screenplay that worked very well, and just developing this. And when it needs to come down to the horror, it actually follows through on beyond any expectation that you have. It's going for that type of stuff. So I very much applaud them not holding anything back, because even when I go back and watch like the 2003 Platinum Dunes remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, even at the time, I thought that film did hold back a certain bit. I felt like that film could have gone a little bit further in what it had to offer in just a horror level, where you think about the film and whatnot. I still felt like they pulled some punches on that. That ain't happening in this movie whatsoever. They go all the way for it, and the film just benefits so much from that. And it's like there's so much with this film that it goes for it. Just like I like the fact that this film, over 12 years later, is still an intense, disturbing type of horror film that still holds up very, very well. And it's like Alexandre Aja has continued to make a good name for himself, make some good films as his career's gone along, and he's still got a long sort of road ahead of him that he's only about 40 years old at this point. He could still be making films for another 20 years and hopefully he's still making stuff as effective as this version of The Hills Have Eyes, backed up with can't-be effects, solid digital effects, endorsement from Wes Craven himself, and all this type of stuff just like hit off very, very well, and just a solid cast put together. I think is a solid piece of horror that, again, not for the light of heart, but if you're definitely into that type of stuff, you're definitely into something that just has that visceral impact, this will absolutely freaking do it for you guys. So throw your comments below about what you feel about this version of The Hills Have Eyes. And I did see the sequel that it came out about 1 year later, and my memory is a little bit less than what my old written review pretty much kind of led me to believe. That it's pretty much an okay horror film that doesn't hold up to the quality of Aja's work because he's not involved in that sequel. So it's a little bit more bland, a little bit less impressive overall. Characters are not quite as interesting or as relatable as you'd like them to be. So I felt it was a little bit of an inferior sequel, but probably something that's still at least worth checking out. So you can throw your comments below about both films there and everything like that, and just feel like what you feel about them in general. So thanks so much, guys. Forever Horror Month will continue on with some other great stuff. So stick around. Take care. Bye-bye.